Hi guys, welcome to this episode of Brain Trash. My name is Maria and I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner.
And I'm Tabitha and I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner.
And we are here to talk about all of the things that we hate about psychiatry, that we love about psychiatry, and that the field should change because it's awful and full of capitalism and the world is awful and on fire. Today we're going to talk about sleep and autism, which is actually a pretty hot topic if you have if you are autistic yourself or if you have an autistic child. You have definitely probably suffered through sleep issues. So there's a lot of science behind this that we're going to go over, and some clinical examples, and then some options for like things that can help or like don't help. So I will say, like, I have my oldest daughter who has autism, and she woke up every 45 minutes for the first like 2 years of her life. Every single 45 minutes she was awake. And like my sleep suffered tremendously. And like I knew at the point she was a newborn and she was waking up every 45 minutes that like she was autistic, because like who else has that kind of sleep cycle and survives, right? And we see like a lot of like level 3 kids who can stay awake 24 plus hours and they just don't sleep, or they're sleeping like 2 hours a day. Like, have you gotten a lot of this in the field?
Oh yeah. No, this is like a very, very common thing I hear from parents. And honestly, like, I know there's a lot of stuff that we talk about where we're like, we don't want to fix autism, right? Like, yes, we don't want to like medicate autism out of anybody. That's not what we do anymore. And sleep is super important for our sanity and super important for safe parenting, right? Like, there is no parent I know on this planet that will function properly as somebody who has not gotten REM sleep in weeks. You know what I mean? Like, there's just no way to be your best parenting self if you're not sleeping. And so I think coming up with solutions for sleep issues that are related to neurodivergence and autism are super important to talk about, to recommend, to have. I have people who have a little one, like young kid, and I hear this a lot, where they'll like wake up in the middle of the night and be awake for hours. And it's like, what do you do with that, right? And so coming up with like really creative ways to help both the kid and the family through something like that, I think is so important.
Like, we talk about, parenting in general or having a newborn is hard, but then when you have autistic kids, it's like sometimes you have the colic level and then the sleep issues. And then we find that like about 80% of preschool kids who are autistic have sleep issues. In general, about 50 to 80% of autistic people have sleep issues. So it will affect the children, it will affect the parents, it will affect the adults, it will affect always. So while some people are like, I absolutely don't want to do medication, this is the breaking point for a lot of parents and adults of like, I need my sleep.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think this is also why it can be something that gets misdiagnosed in people who are able to mask, like level 1 autism, and their masking is like, there are so many other reasons why sleep can be this way. And I think once people get a neurodivergent diagnosis and they start connecting these dots, they're like, oh, okay, wait, you mean the sleep stuff was like always connected to this? And when we look at all of these facts and resources and studies and all of this that really confirm that, it can be super validating to at least be like, oh, okay, there's not something else that's going, it's like, this is related for sure.
And what we see in a lot of like autistic adults is that like they go to sleep a lot later. So there is an incidence of what's called delayed sleep phase that autistic people may have, which means that they go to sleep later and they wake up later. So this is actually something we see in teenagers too, that's really common, and that's like part of the push of like, don't have school at 7 in the morning, because teenagers naturally are going to have this like delayed cycle where they need to sleep later and wake up. And then like sometimes there's just like the sensory thing of like nighttime is quieter, right?
Well, I think too, like just not being perceived, right? When life is exhausting because you're constantly like, oh, people are looking at me, I need to look normal, I need to make eye contact, I need to say things in a way that's socially acceptable, but then you're in like a dark space in your, cocoon, your cave, your blankets, all of the things, and nobody's watching you, and you can be who you want to be and do what you want to do. I always like call this leaning into the neurodivergent urge to rebel against the construct of time. Like, that is something I say very frequently, because like the knowing glance and laughs that I get back from people who are neurodivergent and struggle with this, it's like, I know with every ounce of my body, like I need to go to bed, and there's just this piece in me that's like, but no, I really like am just reveling in this feeling right now of not feeling judged, perceived, wrong, any of that. And so I'm just going to give it a few more minutes,
I can actually relax and function, and I don't need that. But there's still like the component of tired throughout the day that a lot of people will still have if they're not sleeping well, or kind of, fighting the construct of time and rebelling.
Yeah, for sure.
Over there. But there's also a lot of like physiological things too that have roots for autistic folks, and like why they're not able to sleep. So we know that like melatonin is something that's really implicated in it. So this is like the hormone that affects sleep and kind of like the wake cycle. So what happens with melatonin is like in the morning you are exposed to bright light, and that's something that starts to like regulate your cycle. And then like as the sun goes down, you start to create melatonin, and melatonin helps you go to sleep. So like it starts as the sun sets. But we know that like there are genetic mutations in some autistic people that they're not able to create the same output of melatonin that neurotypical people are able to create. So there essentially is like a deficit in melatonin, which is why oftentimes like pediatricians might offer, or psychiatrists might offer melatonin to younger kids at an earlier age, because like your kids literally aren't making it if they're not sleeping.
Well, I think this is like a general thing amongst the public that like you're not supposed to take melatonin long term, and I think there's a lot of that happens, that families don't want to rely on that, but then learning about this and like just the absolute lack of it can kind of change that perception. What's kind of like your spiel that you give people when they're like, oh my gosh, but you're not supposed to take this too long, right?
And it's like, that's nice. But also like, do you want your kid to be functional and sleep? Because like I've had people who've taken, 20 to 40 milligrams of melatonin when like normal recommended is 3 to 6 milligrams. But I've literally had like level 3 autistic kids who are taking 20 to 40, and that's what they've needed to sleep. And 3 to 6 is something that we recommend to neurotypical people. And I don't know if there's like great studies that are done on like the actual dose recommendations for neurodivergent kids, but like usually it's like if you want your kid to go to sleep and to function, like, and this is what they need, like this is what they need, dude. Like we're just trying to like help their brain make what is going to help them to like function in normal society. But a lot of these kids like have things where they can stay up all night and sleep all day, and like that's kind of like the flip that they have in their brain. And like for society reasons, you gotta get them to school and shit. So let's.
Well, it can also be like it can make the symptoms during the day so much worse if the sleep isn't happening. Like just really exacerbate that, like overstimulation, overwhelm, meltdowns, aggression, that kind of stuff can just get so much worse.
Sensory sensitivities are on fire during the day. Like when you don't get enough sleep, like I will know when my daughter doesn't get enough sleep, I'm like, nope, we're not going anywhere today. I don't care if I had a plan. I don't care if I was going to take you to fairyland. Like I don't care where we are going. Like we are staying home and we will do nothing all day, because I know she won't nap. And like that's another thing, they don't get tired during the day, they don't nap. So oftentimes like you might get neurotypical kid who's going to take a nap. No, a lot of like level 2, level 3, and sometimes level 1 autistic kids do not nap, and they will not nap. They don't have like that regular like scheduled sleep thing that everyone else has, that sleep specialists are like, well, just do this one thing and this is gonna help, and like buy my guide and it's gonna be so great. And it's like, no, that's really nice, but that just doesn't work for my kid. And like neither did sleep training, so that's cute. Yeah,
it's one of those things where like just leaning into looking at the privilege behind it too, that like, yeah, and if I am a single mother taking care of an autistic child and I have to have a job to keep the services or to keep the insurance that keeps the services for my child, I've got to sleep. I've got to be able to function, and they've got to be able to be at school without the school calling me all day every day to come pick them up,
That's going to be also like if we are having kids who have poor sleep, like we get aggression at school, we get self-harm, we get like the hitting themselves, we get like all of that horrible stuff, which again, like we're going to be going home, but that's also devastating to see your kid hitting themselves. Just devastating. But if you can prevent that by, some melatonin or having your kid sleep at night, that's fantastic. And then for adults, like if you're not sleeping, again, like you're not functioning well. So that's kind of like where a lot of like autistic adults will end up kind of like moving toward the medication realm too. But I don't think a lot of people understand like the level of like how this is really just beyond your capacity to like be able to sleep. Like you can't just go to like, cognitive behavioral insomnia therapy and like it's going to fix it. Like there are physiological changes that are happening in your brain that have caused this and are implicating it that probably need some sort of like supplementation or medication.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's so much tied to this like ability to fall asleep, and there's so many times that people are asked very specific questions about sleep in healthcare settings that like I also see a lot of it tying into like rumination as well of like, why can't I sleep? I'm not going to be able to sleep. Now I'm even more worked up, and so I definitely can't sleep because I'm thinking about the sleep. And so like I think it just kind of compounds on itself for sure.
So if we've ever wondered, like, why am I waking up so often, and like what can I do to fix it, or why does my kid wake up every couple hours? So let's talk about like the background behind that and like what's going on. So sleep architecture is kind of like I want to say like the overarching thing, and then I'm saying arch twice and I think that's weird, but anyways, so like it's called sleep architecture, where we're kind of looking at like how does sleep structure itself in a way that helps us to feel rested. So there's 4 different stages of sleep. So you have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then REM sleep. That's where you're dreaming. So we have stage 1 is kind of that stage where it's like very light and you're like half asleep and you're kind of in sleep but you're not and you're aware. And then you move into stage 2, which is like a little bit more into sleep, but it's really easy to wake you up if somebody were to come by and make a noise. And then you end up moving into stage 3, where you have like slow wave sleep, and that's where you feel most rested. And if you don't get slow wave sleep, you will not feel rested in the morning. You'll just be kind of like, you're not having it. And then REM sleep, which is kind of responsible for dreaming and processing memories and processing kind of like the daily emotions. And that's also responsible for like your ability to learn throughout the day. So if you don't have REM sleep, you're not learning. And if you don't have slow wave sleep, then you're really not feeling rested. So those are like the 2 most critical parts of like the sleep. And that's also where like we're having issues with autistic brains not having the same sleep architecture patterns that neurotypical people have. So people who are autistic end up having like a lower percentage of slow wave sleep. So they end up waking up more often like before it's finished, or like moving into the next stage too quickly. So that ends up making them more tired and irritable throughout the day. Even if they did get like a full 10 hours of sleep, they're still like appearing very tired. And then they also have decreased REM sleep throughout the night, so they might not dream as often. And I want to say like maybe 25%, like a quarter of your sleep is supposed to be spent in REM, and autistic people are spending about like 10 to 15% in REM sleep. So that affects a lot too. And then there's also like the moving between sleep cycles that is usually done in kind of like a very like cohesive linear pattern, but there's a lot of like waking up that happens when you're autistic. Like your brain's just not doing it. Like the melatonin's not doing it. There's too much cortisol, like the stress hormone at night. You're like kind of like a little bit more alert in your body than you should be. It's just like everything's kind of fighting against you, whereas it shouldn't be. So we end up with a lot of fatigue and a lot of waking up and a lot of like hard time falling asleep kind of things.
This is where like those like parasomnias come in too, right? Like getting up and doing stuff, or having like the hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations, stuff like that. And they'll go wake up a parent and say, I'm having a nightmare or this or that, right? Which then pulls their parent out of whatever stage of sleep they're in, and now everybody starts that cycle over again.
Yeah. And then we also have like restless legs is like a big thing that we see with a lot of like neurodivergent people. So maybe like if you're co-sleeping, you get your kid kicking you a lot, or if you're an adult, maybe you just kick your partner a lot or your cat a lot, and then your cat wakes you up because you keep kicking your cat or your dog. But with some of the sensory sensitivities and avoidance with like eating a lot of foods, we get low iron, especially in kids, but also in adults when you're very particular if you're not supplementing properly. And low iron is like notorious for causing restless legs, and then that will fuck up your sleep too. In general, like we see like stronger sleep issues with like level 3 autism versus level 1 autism, but it's kind of like across the board. And then there's like different medication options that we have. I'm sure like in treatment we've talked about. What are like your favorite as far as like the medications that you've used for sleep?
Well, I think a lot of times it really depends. If there's like comorbid ADHD, a lot of times melatonin guanfacine combo at bedtime is good. Second gen antipsychotics can be helpful for sleep, right? Like these aren't necessarily specifically on board for sleep, but there are things that can be helpful. Otherwise, definitely melatonin supplementation, and then having a really good conversation with parents or whoever about long-term use of melatonin and the risk versus benefit of like, hey, let's all get some like restful sleep, you know?
Talking a little bit about the dose, so they might be reading online it's like harmful, or like, we can't go above 6 milligrams, but like, again, that's for neurotypical brains, and sometimes it can be okay for people to have a little bit higher if they need it. Like, if that 40 milligrams is the only thing that's ever gotten your kid to sleep, I'm not going to take that away from you. And then, I agree with like the guanfacine. I think that's been like huge, especially like the ER at night when it helps during the day to help with some of the hyperactivity. But if you do have like kind of a low key kid, or you are a low key person and you don't have a lot of that hyperactivity, like hypervigilance kind of vibe, guanfacine and clonidine are kind of like calming down that like overactive component. And they modulate norepinephrine, which is like adrenaline, to kind of normalize it. And if that's not the problem, it's not really going to fix it. It can sedate you because, histamine effects, but it's not going to be like the fix all. So there are other options. Like some people benefit really strongly from like SSRIs, or will benefit really strongly from like trazodone at a low dose, mirtazapine at a low dose. And then like you mentioned, the antipsychotics, like I've seen that work really, really well with a lot of level 3 kids, especially like if we're already using it during the day for like agitation or anything like that. That can be really helpful. I'm a big Abilify fan if it works at night.
I think too, like one of the big conversations I have with people is about that like structure around sleep. And I know that there's a lot of like, oh, you just need to do more sleep hygiene, but there is really like a very built-in like asset to having autism and having that really rigid structure and routine, is that like if you can build this in a way that does actually set them up for success, like having a thing that you repeat, right? Like they'll go through like, okay, these are the steps before my bedtime and this is what I do every night, or it's this time on my clock, it gets to that red spot and that's when I know I need to turn my tablet off, right? Like having rules and routines that surround sleep in a way that is beneficial and helpful and not causing like a big meltdown fight every night, I think is a really great way to approach it too.
Visual schedule, like that's a big thing, and like breaking things down. For someone who has dyspraxia, they might forget how to brush their teeth like every day, which is really embarrassing, but steps are hard sometimes. So like having the actual breakdown of like, I'm going to take my clothes off. Here's a picture of putting my pajamas on. Here's a picture of this. Here's a picture of that. And have it be like, pajamas are in the same exact place every night. Here's where I see my visual schedule. And then studies have found that if you take a picture of your child doing the actual routine steps, then they're going to like remember that better. If you're an adult, like just having a visual schedule in general is amazing, or just like written down steps so you can like break things down and it's not some like overwhelming. Also super helpful. People who are autistic, sometimes with different sensory needs, also have to make sure those needs are met before bed. Sometimes weighted blankets or weighted objects can be beneficial. Some people hate them. There are these like cocoon things that you can, have you seen these things? They're like socks and you wear them. That makes me feel so claustrophobic. It makes me want to die.
But there's a little spot to put your toes out, which I'm like, okay, I could maybe do that.
Oh my God, I think I would literally just like crawl out of it. I think I'd be so upset, but I think my daughter would love it. But yeah, they have like, what are they called? They're like, I don't know, sleep socks?
I don't know.
All sorts of things, dude. Depending on like feelings about darkness, like, there's like a thing like the room should be pitch black, but you have people who can have like sensory aversions to like having it very dark. Sometimes people want the light on. Sometimes people want to crawl in the most like, confined little tent and sleep in there, and that makes them feel safe, and that's totally fine. Minimal noise or noise machines can be helpful to like help with sleep and kind of like promote that. But yeah, consistent routine, I'm with you on that.
Like another thing I say a lot is like treating your body like a house plant. Like you gotta have water and sunlight, right? Like these are things that like you need to be outside, getting some fresh air, movement, all of that. Doesn't mean it has to be anything like super crazy or structured, but just something where you're getting these circadian rhythm needs met as well in some way.
Light therapy is something that's actually really recommended for like specifically level 1. It's really beneficial, and it's been found to be beneficial in where like even if you have the little happy light lamp thingy and you have that on your desk, but it has to be like first thing in the morning you get exposure to light. So like I'd need to go outside for like 20 minutes, and you don't like, just as an FYI, because taking things literally, we don't need to like put your eyes to the sun. Like you don't have to do that. It can just be kind of like, you're just walking. You just look straight ahead. Just do your normal thing outside. The sun will come and it will be absorbed, and like it'll help your brain.
Like the skin from sun exposure as well. So
yeah. So I mean, like sun exposure is really important, and then like kind of like expose your body to the fact that it's getting dark out. You know, don't keep like a ton of bright lights on 24/7, and then be like, okay, let's turn off the TV, and then it's dark, and you know that's really confusing for your brain. Sensory things. So like this is where OT could be really important. That was the big thing I wanted to say. Like if you don't get your sensory needs for like proprioceptive or vestibular needs met by bedtime, you will have like hyperactive children, or like you will feel really hyperactive and restless. You'll be like, I need to like push my legs against the wall, and I feel like I need a stimuli, and I feel like just like really like, you know, out of my body right now. So making sure you have like a sensory diet during the day where you're having your sensory needs met, like whatever that is. And you can work with an occupational therapist to kind of figure that out and have a sensory diet, whether it's like I need to like do some sort of exercise earlier in the day, or I need to jump, or I need to like, I don't know. There's a million different things. Personally, I just want to sit on the couch, but I guess that's like being an exhausted parent. My kids want to jump. They have their sensory diets. Anyways, but any other recommendations you can think of for sleep, or like favorite medications we didn't mention yet?
I don't think so. I think a big part of it too is like normalizing this for people and teaching them that it is a big part of it can help take the stress out of it, because again, like sleep is such a, especially when we're talking about caring for kids with autism and sleep problems, like it's such a family experience, and there's so much that can get involved in terms of like just interpersonal, like getting upset, everybody's tired, everybody's overwhelmed, and then if parents are autistic too, it's like, we're all overstimulated and haven't rested. Like being able to just say like, this is a thing, and put a name and language to it for them, and say like, here's some things that have been helpful for other people, and start giving new ideas so that we can pull out of whatever the old routine is that's not been working, and start to create something that does work. In a perfect world, right, we just say like, sleep when you need to sleep, don't sleep when you don't need to sleep. That's not how our world is structured, and that's not how we can function, again, to keep the healthcare that we need, the jobs that feed ourselves and our kids. Like these are things that, even though yes, I would love to just be able to do whatever and sleep whenever my body feels like it, that's also not how this world is structured.
Right, yeah. So remember, if you have patients, or if you are a parent, or if you're a person that struggles with sleep, like this is a physiological thing, and this is something that is in your brain. So you may have different types of helping professionals who might gaslight you into thinking like, oh, just try harder, or like, you know, get darker curtains, or like use your sleep hygiene, and like it could very likely be more than that. So if you're ever unsure, you can always get a sleep study, and that's a whole expensive thing on its own. But if you can't do that, you could definitely think about melatonin as a supplement, or talk to your provider about it. So yeah, sleep issues are a normal thing for people who are autistic. Definitely more common than spoken about.
Is that something that you think that sleep specialists are well trained in terms of how it affects neurodivergent humans? No, I didn't think so, but
I don't. But like maybe I'm being like naive to it. But then like I think like a lot of like the experience that I've seen with like other helping professionals is like they don't talk about it. And like I think I told you I bought like a sleep medicine textbook, and it's like it's this massive textbook that they use to train sleep medicine fellows or residents, or like whatever they use, but it was massive. And I read the whole thing, and I took notes on it, and I like really like inhaled it. And I don't remember that much on neurodivergence. I want to say there was maybe like 1 to 2 pages where there were a few subsets of like, you might see variations in like depression and autism and things like that, but it was nothing like crazy extensive. But if you look at the research for it, there's just like, there's so much stuff that's just not, I'm assuming that's not discussed as much when those professionals are like in school. So unless they probably like
gaps, like the gap between psychiatry and sleep specialty is like these people get lost in the gap, because you know 6 months out you can get a sleep study, but they're probably just going to say like, yep, you're not sleeping great, but not give you the background info that you need to actually help.
Or like sensory issues of having the actual things on your head, so they're not really going to be able to complete it. Or like, you know, well, if they didn't sleep, so we can't do the sleep study because I don't know. So yeah, pediatricians and sleep doctors and psychiatrists, I think oftentimes just pass people back and forth without really understanding like the physiological, you know, concerns behind it. But this is something hopefully people can better educate themselves on to understand neurodivergence as it's getting more prominent, as it's becoming more of an epidemic. Thanks, RFK.
We'll eradicate it soon.
We'll eradicate it soon with that melatonin. Maybe that's the toxin.
Maybe.
Oh man. Okay, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Leave a comment if you have suffered with your own sleep issues and you're autistic, or if you've had kids who've had sleep issues who are autistic, and let us know kind of what's worked for you. Hit follow, hit subscribe, share, and then tune in for our next episode. Thanks so much, guys.